The 118th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Please take your seats. I now give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon.
Your Excellency, Mr. Movens Likhetov, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Peter Thompson, President-elect of the 71st session, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we bring down the gavel on a productive session of the General Assembly. Mr. President, I'd like to thank you for your skilled leadership. Had this session adopted only the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, that would have been notable enough. But member states achieved much more than that. You reached early agreement on the outcome of the high-level plenary meeting on refugees and migrants that will be held this coming Monday. This must now lead to greater compassion, solidarity, and the global sharing of responsibility. At a time of appalling attacks in so many places, you reviewed the global counterterrorism strategy. You held a much-needed special session on the World Drug Program. That outcome document gives us a rights-based approach that stresses prevention, treatment, robust criminal justice, and law enforcement actions. And you held a series of very useful thematic debates on human rights, peace and security, and the plight of children and youth affected by violent extremism. Mr. President, you also took important steps to strengthen the transparency of the work of the Office of the President of the General Assembly. This is in keeping with our wide-ranging efforts to make this organization more accountable to the world's people. One of the most notable innovations of the 70th session concerns my office, that is, the choice of my successor. The Assembly has set in motion a process that is shining greater light onto what has been a largely opaque process. The informal dialogues with the candidates have helped the member states get a good sense of their visions and views, and has enabled the world's people to feel more involved in the process, as they should be. Whatever happens in the weeks ahead, this newly open process has set a new standard from which there should be no retreat. Finally, Mr. President, on a more personal level, let me say that I have greatly appreciated working with you on so many challenges. I congratulate all member states and our many partners for a solid record of achievement. The 71st session will build on these gains as we continue striving to resolve conflict, protect human rights, and advance prosperity for all on a healthy planet. Thank you for your leadership, and I wish you continued good success in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for your statement. Secretary General, Excellencies, President Hage Geingob of Namibia, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, A year ago, in this hall, I outlined how I hoped we could galvanize a new commitment to action and install a spirit of transparency and openness into our work. I believe we have made considerable progress, and yet so much more needs to be done. We kicked off with the largest summit in UN history adopting the 2030 Agenda. In a world of poverty, climate change, conflict, and forced displacement, with impunity for rights violations and huge gender and social inequality, the adoption of the SDGs, together with the historic Paris Climate Agreement, have outlined the route for revolutionary transformation of our whole pattern of production and consumption. That is not only possible, we don't really have a choice. If we are to avoid a future division and destruction of crisis on a scale far greater than those we see today, relentless and integrated implementation of the SDGs and climate action is an absolute necessity. My first high-level thematic debate focused exactly on the plans, actions, finance, technology, and partnerships needed for this. We managed, after much discussion, to push the 2030 Agenda follow-up and review framework on a more solid footing. And you are now in a good position to consider how best to align the agenda for the General Assembly in light of the SDGs. The Assembly also dealt with a list of important issues with relation to the SDGs. The 10-year review of the World Summit on Information Society showed how explosive technological development presents both incredible opportunities and incredible challenges. The special session on the world drug problem showed strong support for a response rooted in human rights and the advancement of public health. The meeting on the global battle against HIV and AIDS recommitted us to end the AIDS epidemic by 2030. We also saw a recommitment to the implementation of support for the least developed countries at the meeting in Antalya. We got preparations well underway for next year's conference on how better to protect our oceans and marine biodiversity. And now, in just over a week, leaders will address the large movements of refugees and migrants to recommit to their international obligations and build on the achievements of the Secretary General's World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. But it is obvious that achieving Agenda 2030 will also demand a reverse of trends in maintaining peace and security and in respect for human rights. Deterioration of the protection of human rights is observed in many countries as we mark the 10th anniversary of the Human Rights Council. In my high-level thematic debate in July, we focused on how that deterioration affects issues of non-discrimination, the rule of law, and civil society space. The General Assembly has also held meetings on the Commission of Inquiry on Syria. We have discussed the Secretary General's Human Rights Upfront initiative and the responsibility to protect. All the while, dangerous conflicts are ongoing and expanding in size and numbers, causing enormous humanitarian catastrophes. Disarmament negotiations have only disclosed long-standing divides, and both military budgets and tensions between major countries have unfortunately increased. The General Assembly has discussed the 3 major UN reviews on peace building and peace operations and on women, peace and security, as well as the Secretary General's plan of action to prevent violent extremism. And we have undertaken the 10-year review on UN global counterterrorism strategy. The overarching focus of discussions in the high-level thematic debate I organized in May and in the debate following the briefing by the Secretary General was on the urgent need for real change, both in member states' approaches and in the tools available to the UN. Peacekeeping must be evaluated, and there must be zero tolerance, of course, for any sexual exploitation or abuse from UN peacekeepers. And in the 5th committee, agreement is needed to provide better funding for mediation, prevention, and peace building in order to reduce the number of conflicts and costly peacekeeping operations in the future. According to the UN Charter, the Security Council is supposed to be the guardian of global peace and security. But in too many serious conflicts, there has been no consensus and no action. We need major and minor powers to recreate what brought us to the SDGs and climate agreement and to the negotiated outcome about the Iranian nuclear program instead of new war or proliferation. We need to understand that also in implementing the Security Council roadmap for peace in Syria and the ceasefire agreed over the weekend, in the global fight against terrorism, in the need to stop arms race and reinvigorate disarmament negotiations, we have existential common interests that are much more important than our conflicts of interest. We need Security Council reform that can contribute to this common understanding. The discussion about this reform has been going on for more than 2 decades, with only small steps forward. The work this year, facilitated by Ambassador Lucas of Luxembourg and building on last year's text and annex, points to a common understanding, at least, that we need an enlarged council, better reflecting the geopolitical realities of the 21st century. But if you are serious about reform, all key players, including the Permanent Five, have to change the script and be willing to compromise. Reforms are important, but there is also within few weeks the extremely important election of the new UN Secretary General. I'm very proud that we broke new ground with unique transparency in the selection process. The 2-hour presentation of each of the candidates in the General Assembly dialogues and their collective global town hall debate in this hall were important highlights and helped to include the global public in the debate about the future of the UN. I hope that transparency proves instrumental in identifying the best possible new Secretary General over the coming month. I also appeal to the Security Council to make the remaining process open and engaging, to preserve the legitimacy of their recommendation as it feeds into Assembly's final decision. Indeed, this morning I sent a letter to the Council summarizing the process to date and setting out some of the lessons we have learned so far. That letter also addresses the call from large number of members for the appointment of a kind of co-facilitators to prepare an appointment resolution during the next session. In my view, such a call is consistent with the spirit of transparency and inclusivity which the process has been imbued with to date. At the same time, as we move to the final decision, we must focus on forging consensus and ensuring that the next United Nations Secretary General will receive both the full support of membership and adequate preparation time before taking office. Excellencies, transparency and openness, however, must go far beyond the SG selection process. Throughout this session, I have sought to install greater transparency in everything we do, and I'm delighted to see that many of the steps I have advanced relating to the integrity, transparency, and accountability of my own office have now been codified in the GA revitalization resolution adopted early this morning, and I look forward to witnessing the first ever taking of an oath of office by the incoming president in just a few moments. But we also have deadlocks on the issue of civil society participation in UN meetings. The HIV/AIDS meeting was particularly overshadowed by objections to NGOs that focus on the LGBT issues. It's time here to find sustainable and reasonable solutions. More broadly, we must also work to consistently improve the effectiveness of the General Assembly. There are, for example, outstanding challenges in the Fifth Committee. While we managed to reach agreement on the budget in time, all too much rigidity remains in the organization and budgeting and in member states' positions. Similarly, on a number of occasions, agreement in negotiations was held up by one or two delegations alone, which in itself undermines the collective power of this assembly. In addition, it's clear that the workload on delegations, on the office of the PGA and the relevant parts of the Secretariat is growing year on year, and it is critical that we focus our efforts on those areas where we can add most value. Excellencies, before concluding, allow me to extend my gratitude to all who contributed to the results of this session. First of all, Secretary Ban Ki-moon, it has been an honor and a pleasure to work closely and amicably with you and your team. We must all specially congratulate you with the successful outcome of your years of hard and tireless work for climate action. I wish you the very best in the remainder of your term here and in your future endeavors. And I wish to thank you, the membership, for your commitment, cooperation, and friendship during this session. In particular, I wish to thank each of the permanent representatives who played a prominent role together forward, the vice presidents, the various facilitators and chairs on the regional group, as well as the president of the ECOSOC and the president of the presidents of the UN Security Council, with whom I enjoyed close collaboration. I also wish to thank colleagues across the Secretariat, especially Mrs. Catherine Pollard and her team in the DGACM, who have been immense assistance to me and to my office. Similarly, I wish to thank all those who contributed to my office, either through financial support or secondments or both. Not least, I wish to thank each and every one of my own team who have been so professional, enthusiastic, and innovative throughout the year. A special thanks also, of course, to the officials of the Foreign Ministry, including the PR of Denmark, and to the government that asked me to come forward as candidate. I hope I have brought good Danish values and attitudes, directness included, to this year's presidency. Excellencies, it has been a great honor to be your president. I encourage you to continue to make this body more relevant, more outward-looking, more transparent, and of course, more effective. In His Excellency Peter Thomsen, you will have an excellent PDA 71, who is committed to doing just that and to giving a universal push to the Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you all for your attention and your cooperation. Thank you very much. We are now coming to the end of the 70th regular session of the General Assembly. May I invite representatives to stand and observe 1 minute of silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. I now invite His Excellency Peter Thomsen, President-elect for the 71st session, to make a statement and, in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 70/305 of 13th of September 2016, to take an oath of office.
So, Mr. President, Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Prior to my assuming the high office of the presidency, and before taking the solemn oath of office, I have a few remarks to make before parting with my status as President-elect. Firstly, on behalf of you all, it's my duty and privilege this afternoon to thank the President of the 70th session of the General Assembly for his selfless service to the United Nations throughout the past year. President Likhatov brought new levels of transparency and openness to the United Nations, and there are few who do not see the many benefits derived. In this regard, one need think only of his clear, firm leadership of the General Assembly's comprehensive interaction with the candidates aspiring to fill the post of the next Secretary General of the United Nations. Transparency calls upon the exercise of our most worthy qualities of honesty, equity, and ethical behavior. Under its wide purview, we are required to hold ourselves accountable to the highest standards expected of us as the selected representatives of humankind congregated here at the United Nations. Thus, the Likhatov legacy is a demanding one, but I'm confident it will be an enduring one. For I, for one, will commit to build on it over the coming session. So, President Likhatov, I say on behalf of my colleagues here present, it was a job well done. It was a mantle well worn, and you should leave this great hall today in the full knowledge of our appreciation. I ask my colleagues to stand with me now and express that thanks by acclamation. Secondly, I express thanks to our Secretary General for the continuation of his great service to this world. In the 70th session, the Secretary General's commitment to the creation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda achieved glorious fruition, and his relentless pursuit of a breakthrough on climate change was rewarded in Paris. We are blessed with another 4 months of his leadership, so today is not the time for valedictory praise. But it is a reminder that we must seize the months ahead to garner from him all the broad wisdom and venerable experience he can pass on to us this year. I look forward very much to working closely with our Secretary General and his team between now and the year's end. The 71st will be a special year for us all. Not least will be the fact that we will have the experience of working with 2 Secretaries General. The search for the best possible candidate to fill the post is approaching its final stages. Once the selection process is complete, it will be important that we undertake an orderly appointment and a smooth transition to demonstrate the strength of our institutional stability. As the President of the Assembly, I will dedicate myself to facilitation of the transition process. I will be available at all times to assist the incoming Secretary General settle into her or his responsibilities of office. Throughout the 71st, I will work to strengthen the relations between the UN's organs, continuing the practice of holding regular meetings with the Secretary General, the Presidents of the Security Council, and the President of ECOSOC. I will inform the membership as to the scope of these meetings. And in addition to upholding the principles of transparency and inclusiveness during the 71st session, I will seek to give greater prominence to ethics in the work of the United Nations. As far as the Office of President is concerned, financial transparency will be maintained by ensuring that all contributions to the running of the office are entered into the UN Trust Fund, where the donors and expenditures will be public knowledge. In this regard, I thank the governments who have contributed to date for their generosity and support for the work of the OPGA in the 71st session. I also thank the governments and agencies that have seconded staff to the OPGA for the 71st session. We have a large staff this year because of the appointment of a team specifically dedicated to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. This team has been put in place to fulfill the commitment I have made to achieving meaningful progress in all 17 goals during the 71st. That commitment, however, will not be delivered by this Assembly alone, and in this regard, I will work to strengthen the engagement of civil society and other actors in our overall work. I have heard and will respect the membership's desire for a calendar less crowded with high-level meetings and events. I'm undertaking to look at creative ways for us to address the many pressing issues before us without crowding that calendar. We will strive to find new methods to sustain peace, to resolve entrenched conflicts, diminish the atrocities of global terrorism, better manage migrant and refugee flows, and resolve the many humanitarian crises that remind us of the millions of people in our world who are still denied even the most basic conditions for a secure life. I welcome the cessation of hostilities that has come into effect in Syria and call on all parties to honor the terms of the agreement. I sincerely hope that this understanding may ease the humanitarian suffering and lead to a lasting peace for the Syrian people. The link between sustainable development, peace and security, and human rights has never been more explicit. I will therefore encourage a heightening of human rights work of this Assembly throughout the 71st session. Next week, for example, the world leaders come together for the high-level meeting on large movements of refugees and migrants. I regret the evidence of widespread lack of empathy for people on the move, many of whom are fleeing from conflict, persecution, or climate change. I congratulate those who are not shirking from their decent responsibilities. It's time to turn down the rhetoric of intolerance and ratchet up a collective response based on our common humanity. There is much the 71st session must undertake in the area of peace and security, building on the review of global counterterrorism strategy, including the Secretary-General's plan of action on violent extremism, will act on improving the UN architecture to face these threats. In these troubled times, no community is immune from violent extremism and terrorism. We face this scourge together, and we must find the solutions together. As the representative of a proud, troop-contributing country these last 4 decades, I'm fully aware we must be diligent in coherent implementation of the outcomes from last year's UN reviews on peacekeeping, peace building, and on women, peace and security, including through action in the Fifth Committee relating to the special political missions. We must also look to take forward the implementation of the ambitious Sustaining Peace agenda, agreed by the General Assembly and the Security Council earlier this year. Through the concept of sustaining peace, we have the opportunity to bring new coherence and coordination to our work across peace and security, development and human rights, our shared goal and responsibility for sustaining peace across the globe. Reform of the UN Security Council is also a work at hand for the 71st. The membership is unanimous in agreeing that reform is necessary to align the Security Council with the realities of the 21st century, not least of which will be the security consequences of climate change. The question is not whether reform is necessary, but how and in what form it will be achieved. And since reform is required in the best interests of the community of nations as a whole, it is therefore logical that the community as a whole must move forward together in resolving reform. I am committed to facilitating this movement in the 71st. Excellencies, this time last year we were gearing up for the summit to adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Like a lighthouse in a world dogged by despair and division, the 2030 Agenda came into existence, and we had a bright new beacon to light us out of the poverty and unsustainable practices that bedevil our planet. The 2030 Agenda has since had its foundations strengthened by the historic promise of the Paris Climate Agreement. It has been heartening to observe the sincerity with which governments and national planning agencies around the world have begun integrating the agenda into national processes. But make no mistake, the great majority of humankind has yet to learn of the agenda. It has yet to embrace the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that, if successfully implemented, will bring an end to poverty and secure a sustainable place for humanity on this planet. It is for this reason that the theme of the 71st session is the Sustainable Development Goals, a universal push to transform our world. The 70th session launched the SDGs, and for integrity's sake, The 71st must be the year we witness the wheels turning on the implementation of all 17 SDGs. I'm committed to taking the 17 goals to the people so that they can understand them as rights and responsibilities, as humanity's recipe for a sustainable world for them and their children. I wish to see us provide clear guidance through this year's QCPR process in support of an efficient and integrated response from the UN system, and so that we are confident that the system is up to the massive task of implementing the 2030 Agenda. I will look to advance action to revitalize and align the agenda of the General Assembly with that of the 2030 Agenda. And I will work closely with the President of ECOSOC to ensure that work of both organs is mutually reinforcing. I'll also support a successful Habitat 3 conference in October in Quito, and work to deliver a truly game-changing outcome for the health of our oceans through the Oceans Conference on Goal 14 to be held here at the United Nations in early June 2017. As promised, I've formed an SDG implementation team within the Office of the President. I'll work to advance the range of initiatives and events in collaboration with you, the membership, with the UN system, civil society, private sector and others to get the wheels of implementation turning. We must look at finance, education, outreach, partnership and resourcing. Throughout the 71st, we will hold ourselves accountable to achieving that meaningful progress for each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Before closing my remarks, I'm going to invite my two granddaughters, Grace and Mirabelle, to join me on the stage. They've flown all the way from the South Pacific to be with me on this day, and there's a reason I'd like them to be with me while I say what I have to say to you. So Grace is 7 years old and Mirabelle is 5. That means when the remaining 14 years of the Sustainable Development Agenda have expired and the year 2030 is upon them, they will be young adults, ready to fulfill the potential of their lives. What kind of world will we have bequeathed them and all their brothers and sisters around the world, your own grandchildren, your own children, born and yet to be born? Will it be a world where the projected loss of biodiversity on land and sea severely limits the possibilities of life? Where atmospheric levels of CO2 have gone well beyond the 1.5 to 2 degrees thresholds, thereby imperiling humanity's place on this planet? Will it be a world in which today's unsustainable patterns of consumption and production have spiraled out of control? Where poverty, inequality, and wretched governance have driven people to desperate acts of violence, migration, and human degradation? Or will it be the world we envisage in the 2030 Agenda? A world of planetary prosperity in which the scourge of extreme poverty has been eradicated, food security and healthy lives are enabled, water and sanitation provided to all, with inequalities reduced in peaceful, inclusive, just, well-governed societies, where women and girls are empowered, cities and settlements are safe and resilient, and where quality education is equitable and inclusive. If humanity's willpower is strong enough, then by 2030, this will be a world in which energy is sustainable and affordable for all, and men and women will have decent work with resilient infrastructure, sustainable industries, and limitless possibilities of innovation. People will live on a planet where we have taken the necessary action to combat climate change and restore terrestrial ecosystems and the cycle of decline in which the ocean is currently caught, and has reverted to a maritime world free of pollution and the deleterious effects of acidification, once more enjoying healthy fish stocks and coastal ecosystems. It goes without saying that it's towards this better world that we must make our course. And I swear on the love of these grandchildren that I'll do all in my power as President of the General Assembly of the 71st session to keep the headings of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda on course and that the promised shores of a sustainable way of life on this planet will be achieved when the year 2030 comes around. The communal conscience of our generation will not rest easy until it is clear we're going to achieve the SDGs. And the 71st session will only be fulfilling if, at its end, we can be assured that real progress is underway on each of the goals, and that our faith and hope and progress is not misplaced, and a better world will be at hand by the year 2030. I thank you, Grace and Member. Excellencies, in your wisdom and your dedication to the highest standards of governance, in fealty to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, the membership of the United Nations has this year created a code of ethics for the Presidency of the General Assembly. I applaud the results of your efforts, and I embrace the spirit and word of the code. In addition, you have decided that the first time in the history of the United Nations, and for all sessions henceforth, at the time of transition from one session of the General Assembly to the next, the incoming President shall take an oath of office. It's now my high honor to take that oath within this historic fulcrum of the community of nations, witnessed by you, the anointed representatives of the nations, and by the broad citizenry of humanity observing our proceedings today. I now raise in my right hand the Charter of the United Nations, and I hereby affirm the prescribed presidential oath of office. I solemnly declare that I shall truthfully perform my duties and exercise the functions entrusted to me as President of the General Assembly of the United Nations in all loyalty, discretion, and conscience, and that I shall discharge these functions and regulate my conduct with the interest of the United Nations only in view, and in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the Code of Ethics for the President of the General Assembly, without seeking or accepting any instruction in regard to the performance of my duties from any government or other source external to the organization.
Before proceeding further, I would like to invite to the podium the President-elect of the 71st session, His Excellency Peter Thomsen, to hand the gavel over to him. I declare closed the 70th session of the General Assembly.
Thank you. Some of this inside of me.
Yes, you start there.
Gavel?
Gavel, yes.
Who am I going to hit? Up here. I declare open the 71st regular session of the General Assembly and call to order its first plenary meeting. In accordance with Rule 62 of the Rules of Procedure, I invite representatives to stand and observe 1 minute of silent prayer or meditation. Thank you. Excellencies, it is now my honor to give the floor to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon. You have the floor, sir.
Your Excellency, Mr. Peter Thompson, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Mr. Movens Likhetov, President of the 70th Session, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to join you for the opening of the 21st session of the General Assembly. I congratulate most sincerely His Excellency Mr. Peter Thompson of Fiji for assuming this very important office of presidency. Mr. President, Fiji is on the front lines of many key issues on the international agenda, from climate change to disaster risk reduction to promoting growth and prosperity for all. Your country's perspectives will certainly enrich our deliberations in the month ahead. I welcome the theme you have chosen for this session, the Sustainable Development Goals, a universal push to transform our world. This first year is crucial. It is a time when all member states should align their policies, programs, and spending behind the 17 goals. It is also time to bring the Paris Agreement on climate change into force. The high-level event I'm hosting on 21st September will strengthen momentum for achieving that objective this year. The Habitat 3 conference next month in Quito, Ecuador, will be a further opportunity. I look forward to hearing your strong voice across our agenda. The Assembly begins work in earnest on Monday with a summit on the plight of refugees and migrants. And of course, on January 1st, 2017, the 71st session will welcome the 9th Secretary General into these halls and conference rooms. Mr. President, you will serve as a bridge between my administration and the next, as you said in your acceptance speech. You will have my full support and that of my team in ensuring a seamless transition. The Assembly will be called upon to address many threats and to show its solidarity with the people facing injustice. People also look to this body not just to react to problems, but to work proactively and preventively to better the human condition. Mr. President, I know you have been undertaking wide-ranging consultations in preparations for the duties you now assume. The Secretariat and I look forward to working closely with you towards a session that produces meaningful results for all. I count on your strong leadership, and I thank you very much.
I thank the Secretary General for his remarks, and next I would like, in keeping with established practices, to invite the attention of the General Assembly to document A/71/381. It contains a letter from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the General Assembly, in which he informs the Assembly that 4 member states are in arrears on the payment of their financial contributions to the United Nations within the terms of Article 19 of the Charter. I'd like to remind delegations that under Article 19 of the Charter, a member of the United Nations which is in arrears in payment of its financial contributions to the organization shall have no vote in the General Assembly if the amount of its arrears equals or exceeds the amount of the contributions due from it for the preceding 2 full years. May I therefore take it that the General Assembly takes note of the information contained in 71/381. It is so decided. I would like now to invite the General Assembly to turn to the appointment of the members of the Credentials Committee. Rule 28 of the Rules of the Procedure provides that the General Assembly at the beginning of each session shall appoint, on the proposal of the President, a Credentials Committee consisting of 9 members. Accordingly, it is now proposed that for the 71st session, the Credentials Committee should consist of the following members: Cameroon, China, Malawi, the Netherlands, Paraguay, the Republic of Korea, the Russian Federation, St. Lucia, and the United States of America. May I take it that these states that I have just mentioned are hereby appointed members of the Credentials Committee? It is so decided. The Assembly will now turn its attention to document A/71/382, containing a letter dated 7th of September 2016 from the Chair of the Committee on Conferences, addressed to the President of the General Assembly. Members are aware that pursuant to Section 1, Paragraph 7 of Assembly Resolution 40/243 of 18 December 1985, no subsidiary organ of the General Assembly should be permitted to meet at the United Nations headquarters during the main part of a regular session of the Assembly, unless explicitly authorized by the Assembly. On the strict understanding that meetings would have to be accommodated within available facilities and services, authorization is thus sought for the following subsidiary organs: United Nations Appeals Tribunal, Committee on Relations with the Host Country, Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, Executive Board of the United Nations Children's Fund, United Nations System Chief Executives Board for Coordination, Board of Auditors, Panel of External Auditors of the United Nations, the specialized agencies, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, Independent Audit Advisory Committee, and the Committee on Conferences itself. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to authorize these subsidiary organs of the Assembly to meet during the main part of the 71st session of the General Assembly? It is so decided. Before concluding, I'd like to inform delegations that the General Committee will meet tomorrow, Wednesday, 14th September 2016, at 10 a.m. in the Economic and Social Council chamber to consider the memorandum of the Secretary General on the organization of the 71st session of the General Assembly, adoption of the agenda and allocation of items to be issued as A/Burr/71/1. The first plenary meeting of the General Assembly at its 71st session is now concluded, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Congratulations.